Welcome to Fireside Chat Fridays, sponsored by Parents for Public Schools of Syracuse to give voice to the families and students of Syracuse on education matters. You're listening on Straight Independent Radio. We join this episode, already in progress, with our guests, Karen Cordano, candidate for Syracuse City School Board, and Amalia Skandalis, former Syracuse City School District art teacher.
I received in the suburbs, and that did not seem right to me. I knew because of current studies that have been done that when you have that I was not harming my child in any way by having him be part of a school district that was criminally underfunded and undersupported, because test scores, which is a really poor way to measure, but one of the ways to measure how kids are doing, show that when you put a middle class kid in a classroom that is majority minority, or that is majority kids living in poverty, that their test scores don't go down, yet the other children's test scores rise. And that's probably because of the resources that that child can bring to the classroom, not because that child is any better in any way. But realizing all of that made me want to become involved and to be part of the solution. So that was the beginning of it. Honestly, even before then, when we moved to Syracuse when I was 9 months pregnant with my eldest, and my husband is he teaches at SU, and we were told by colleagues, by HR, that you couldn't live in the city and you couldn't send your kids to city schools. And I told my husband I wasn't moving to Syracuse if we weren't living in the city, because I've lived in cities for my entire adult life and I have no desire to live in the suburbs or raise my children in that environment. And so, we live in the university neighborhood, and had watched with great sadness as our kids moved through preschool, and the big talk was this talk amongst the families: are you going to move? Are you going to go to the suburbs? It was a very blatant racist conversation, very much out in the open, that happened. And we're committed to the city. We are committed to the school district. We love the school district, and we feel like both of our children are thriving.
You bring up a great point, that prejudice that seems to exist out there throughout the county against Syracuse City School District and Syracuse City Schools, and it seems to sometimes spread over to the students. Amalia, I wanted to ask you, what was your experience of that attitude of people who were working in the city about the Syracuse City School District?
Sorry, I had some dog trouble. I had to move the puppies out of here. They were being loud. They're gone now.
So my question for you is, what has your experience been of this prejudice that seems to exist about Syracuse City Schools and the students in the schools, particularly among people who work in the city but don't live in the city?
Is that question to me, Sam?
Yes, that's for you, Amalia.
Okay, I think the first thing that I see a disconnect in being with the curriculum, but also in a teacher's mindset within the culture and community where we work in Syracuse. When we had the Common Core curriculum come through in New York State, which is now called the Next Generation Standards, it kind of morphed into this thing. Teachers were all of a sudden given a handbook for education that said, teachers have to teach these things, students have to say these things. There was no differentiation really when it came to which learners you were serving, which community you were in, or really what's even going on in the real world. One of the biggest things my students would ask me when I was teaching at Blodgett, for example, I've been an art teacher in the city for, over 12 years. Currently unemployed, working from home, but I've been in many of our school buildings. I've been in Fraser, I've been in Porter, I've been in Blodgett, Roberts, Levy, when it was still Levy, quite a few, you name it. I don't think that teachers that come from suburbia, from a different cultural mindset, necessarily have the same understanding of the population they're going in to teach. I'm not sure that they're well prepared ahead of time as far as the district maybe being as forthcoming, and this is the situation you're going to walk into. And I would hear just a lot of closed doors and closed conversations with children asking questions and wanting to know more, and then maybe teachers not being able to necessarily meet them where they're at, or open those doors or tend to those doors based on the curriculum and the administration and the things that are kind of being put in front of them, like that's what's more important, instead of tending to this actual child and this human being that's in front of you. One of the biggest questions that I would get during February, during Black History Month, is why are we not learning about Black history during Black History Month? And that is a fantastic question to our educators at the federal level, at the New York level, who have put this curriculum in place and decided this is what our kids need to know. But yet during the month of Black History Month, our 8th graders were learning about Egypt, like strictly small, very small. So I think in order to bring the conversation, more into the current age, the curriculum really has to open up and match, students where they're at. I don't think standardizing everything about education is just going to work for everybody like a cookie cutter that way. I hope that answered a bit of your question there.
Yes, that did answer the question somewhat. I do have another question.
Okay.
And this is for, where did I put it? Okay, Karen, yes, for you. As a candidate and as a parent, are you satisfied with how the district responds to the concerns of families? There's been a lot of talk this week about the survey, about are we gonna go to more days of in-person learning, or are we gonna go fully remote? And it's a 2-question survey about a very complicated thing. So my question to you is, how do you view the response of concerns of families from the district?
I think that the district listens to the loudest voices. And I think that the district can be reactive when there could be more wisdom in taking a breath and a moment. I know that things move very quickly, but before making decisions, I think that more voices need to be listened to, not just the voices that have access and the voices that are going to make the biggest noise. Every family is different, and I filled out that survey. I don't want to get too deep into the lives of for privacy reasons, of my personal, my children's situation, but I am familiar with special needs and IEPs and 504s. And so if you are familiar with that kind of thing as a parent, being able to provide special education services at home is not really a I'm not a special ed teacher, and so that makes my family's decision much easier. But every family is different. Everyone has different priorities based on what their child's needs are. So I would say that I think that there's a real disconnect and that there is a missed opportunity and communication struggle. And if you have the resources to have your voice heard, then your voice is heard, no problem. But if you do not have those resources, then it becomes much more difficult and decisions are made for you.
And one of the things that we are about here at Parents for Public Schools Syracuse is making sure that every family has that access and every family has the resources to make their voices heard. And I agree with you, there is this disconnect between families and the students and kind of the people who are running the district. They're not having the same conversations. They don't seem to be having the same experiences of the education process here in Syracuse. Amalia, I wanted to ask you about the schools that you've worked in. You said that you've been in almost every building in the district. What was?
Well, I wouldn't say every building, but before we get into that and I forget my train of thought, can I touch base on your last question a little bit about this two-question survey and what's coming out to parents? I think what we're having is quite a larger problem than we're just seeing in Syracuse City Schools is county overreach. I don't understand why County Executive Brian McMahon has all of a sudden decided that he's going to play education policymaker. But I need to be very clear about the point that policy for schools happens at our school boards and in our schools. Ryan McMahon, Onondaga County has absolutely no business setting policy for our schools. East Syracuse, Manoa, which is where my kids attend. I live in Eastwood. I'm right outside of the district. When I moved back to Syracuse, I was working for the district, so I felt it was a personal conflict of interest to have my children attend the same school because I'm a vocal individual. And I felt like I couldn't necessarily advocate for my own children, you know, if I had to worry about my job. And I think that's what our teachers are facing in education as a whole. I don't think that the people with the loudest mouth and the most resources get heard. I think they get cut. And I think that's what we have going on in Syracuse City School District. The teachers that are the strongest and the best for our kids, the teachers that are the most well qualified, highest trained, and have been there the longest, the teachers that maybe care for them the most and are the most vocal and advocate, you know, driven when it comes to getting things in the classrooms and for their kids, those are the ones that get messed with. Those are the ones that get transferred buildings. Those are the ones that get denied future employment. Those are the ones that get put on JUUL agreements. And for people that aren't familiar, a JUUL agreement is when you're nearing the end of your 4-year term for tenure. In New York State, tenure law changed from 3 years to 4 years. So now when you're nearing the end of your 4th year, you come up for tenure review and the district decides, well, have you been a good little employee, or do you maybe need another year of review? And if you maybe need yet another year of review, it's basically like putting you on probation all over again and threatening you will lose your job if you don't X, Y, and Z. So that's kind of the state of the disaster that's going on within our Syracuse City public schools, where teachers are being, you know, ebbed and flowed as the state of opinions and this little glimpses of data is even coming out. We have the slightest, you know, down pitch of what's looking better in data, and all of a sudden, you know, a man who is not a health professional, not an education professional, not a policy professional when it comes to our schools and our children is going to put forth a policy proposal, was the way it was worded to me in my survey from my district. We have the same 2-question survey that asks us if we want our children to go fully remote, fully virtual 5 days a week, or fully in school for 5 days a week. My own children just started going back to school hybrid 2 days a week because to me, as a you know, high risk family, didn't feel safe up until this point. I saw the school buildings, I saw the distancing, I saw the protocols in place, and I decided, well, ESM has this all under control, and I felt safe. They made me feel safe enough as a parent. And I asked them, I said, with the talks of Onondaga County, because it already started with the talk in the county, we can reduce it to 3 feet. I don't know where they got 3 feet. I sure didn't see the CDC tell me that 3 feet COVID can't be spread anymore and it's okay for my child to sit. I can't even get into that part right now. I'm going to stick with the science is what I'd like to do. I was assured in the district that they would not be reducing distancing and would not be reducing mask mandates or anything else. What they did tell me was that the county changed, without notifying anybody, they changed contact tracing protocols. So now for our children on the bus, for example, and mine do not ride the bus because I do not like or trust this policy. The new policy is, instead of contact tracing everybody on the bus, picture, what's a bus? An 8 by 20 foot square foot box, right? So they contact trace in restaurants. They contact trace if you have first person contact as an adult. But if you're a child riding in an 8 by 20 foot box, shoulder to shoulder next to somebody else across the aisle, Onondaga County now only contact traces the children that are directly next to you, in front of you, or behind you. I'm not sure if they necessarily notified parents before that decision was made, but they told me there was no way to notify me if there was a positive COVID that wasn't directly next to my child, so I declined my bus ride to school.
Well,
Now
that is concerning when we know that we're dealing with an airborne disease. I want to get back to something that you were talking about, the work environment for teachers, classroom staff, building staff here in the district. And it's not the first time that I have heard concerns that people have that speaking up will cost them their livelihood. So
Sure.
my question for you, Karen, is what do you see as the role of the school board in combating this toxic work environment that has people operating out under fear of losing their jobs?
So the role of the school board is really technically twofold. It's to hire the superintendent and it's to approve the budget. But what I think I have good relationships with the majorities of the members of the school board now, and with the current slate of candidates that are running. And what my hope is that when I hope to join the school board, that the board will be able to form kind of a coalition to approach the superintendent with topics like these that are a concern, where we can say, you know, this is a matter that we really need to be looked at. And I think that there definitely is a tension between the teachers and the district that absolutely needs to be addressed, and that the district needs to hear it. I think that a lot of the issues that we're experiencing, de-escalation is something that can help in so many different areas. But the not feeling supported, I know, is definitely tied to the code of conduct. And I think that while it is definitely true that the environment in the district has improved since the code of conduct has been put into place, there is a distrust. We need to go back to the code of conduct in terms of how the district can feel pressure from the state to make sure that we're only disciplining X amount of, while keeping the discipline equitable. I think that it can become a numbers game, which is a ridiculous way to run. You're creating a situation where if a teacher feels something unsafe is happening and that child is still put in the classroom, the teacher's going to be distrustful. This creates implicit bias. You're not dealing with the situation that is actually happening. And sometimes those situations, it could be anything. It could be the teacher through frustration who is accidentally escalating. So de-escalation training, I think, would help a great deal. I think that implicit bias training would help a great deal. I think that it needs to be continuous, not one time, every single year. Cultural competency, all of these the tensions come from I think in large part, the fact that the teachers and the student body are so incredibly different. I think the district's already making an effort in order to hire more teachers of color, which is absolutely what needs to be happening. But the fact that the cultural competency doesn't exist in a lot of the cases is really troubling.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the code of conduct, because that raises the question of it's a national trend all throughout the country that minority students and students who are receiving special education services are disproportionately impacted by school codes of conduct. Now, if that is the source, truly the source of tension between the district and the district employees, what does that say about the culture of the district, wherein something that disproportionately impacts minority students and students with disabilities is a thing that the district and its employees seem to be butting heads over?
I think it's something that I think everyone's dancing around it. I think that we need to face some of these issues head on, and it's uncomfortable and really difficult to talk about. And you know, I don't want to speak for all white people, but a lot of white people don't want to talk about race, and we need to talk about race. I mean, I don't particularly want to talk about race. It's uncomfortable. It's hard. It's facing up to, and you know, talking about race is an absolute minefield. You know, you're going to get stuff wrong. I get stuff wrong all the time. And but we aren't going to fix these problems unless we face it and understand we're going to get stuff wrong, and that we need to listen and learn and do the work.
Now, besides the code of conduct, there seems to be a lot of tension between the district employees, families. I hear from district employees a lot, and the first thing they say is keep my name out of it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
They are concerned about what will happen to them for speaking out. And they're not, the things that they are saying are things that should not be happening in the district. People harassing their subordinates, teachers not getting the supports they need in the classroom. I'm not sure that that's really down to the code of conduct. It seems that this is more of a bigger institutional issue. And Amalia, I want you to speak to this as from your position as a teacher who worked in the district and who no longer is employed by the district.
Oh Lord, I'm just having like a little breathing time right now. I was working for the district during the assurance of discontinuance and when it was dissolved, and I personally witnessed threatening of teachers, falsifying of data, removal of data from our computer systems. Administrators would go in and physically change write-ups that teachers put in themselves, change the wording of what happened. There were several instances that I was directly involved in where a student, for example, would be harmed, say something happened, and you have to document what happens between the two students. And then it was documented that a mediation took place. The children had a conversation. Proper protocols and procedures that we have in place look good on paper, and they have trained people yearly after year after year, which are there and solid and research-based, don't happen. They say they happen on paper. As far as the school board knows, it happens on paper. And I also speak as somebody who was a school board member myself with the East Syracuse Manoa District. I was an elected board member for 2 years, so I've also been through the policy and the law. making. I would also like to put out there to any Syracuse City School Board candidates that that superintendent works for you. You don't just hire him, he works for you. And along with making sure the budget passes, setting and approving new policy and programming for our kids really needs to be of utmost importance, because especially our kids in the city, they do not get a supplemented suburban education. Our tax dollars are what funds school in a district like Syracuse City, where there's upside down taxes and massive corporations that are given tax breaks for decades that don't pay, like Destiny Mall, who just said our kids can't go there anymore, by the way, even though they've benefited, I think, from over $20 million in tax breaks or something like that. We have a dysfunctioning adult problem, very much so. Personally, I don't think that the things they have in place are well done. In buildings that I've been in, you know, you have tiny children that are in the halls, unattended, running around, telling grown-ups P's and Q's. You know, we have the constructs in place, the BIC room, for example, the Behavior Intervention Center. In a Shangri-La world, it should be a situation, you see a child in crisis, you see a child who's escalating, that child needs a break from your classroom. It's easy. Whatever triggered the child, it's environmental. If it's you, first of all, you need to deal if it's you, and you need to be quiet and step back from that child. I think we have a lot of power struggles that set our children off in the city that don't need to happen. It's completely unprofessional and not necessary. But when a child needs a minute, you need to give a child that minute. They need a change of time and place. They need a settled environment. They need a visual change. They need physical water touching their body. They need cold air. They need things that are going to biologically switch their brain, their little tiny child development brain, into a safe mode. Our children already come from communities and environments of trauma, and to come into an educational institution that is just another place for trauma is nothing more than damaging for our kids. Our kids are not being set up to have a successful future. That's a grown-up problem. I don't know how else to say that.
Can I say something, Samantha?
Sure, go ahead, Karen.
So I agree with the fact that there are so many of the kids that are coming to school in the district who are not ready to learn, and it's not their fault. You can't, because of what is going on in their personal life, they come to the school building and they are not ready to learn. And at that point, we need help from the county, we need help from the city, and we need help from the state. The school district, I feel like one thing that Superintendent Alicia really excels at, and that the board has definitely, rallied around, is trying to address the needs of these kids. Like he cares about these kids, and he cares about getting food to these kids and about the services that they need, but there aren't enough services, and he's not running a restaurant business. That's not what we're supposed to be doing in education, and yet it falls upon the district's shoulders to distribute meals that are needed. Like, this needs to happen. It's a good thing that it's happening, and I'm glad that there has been, so much focus on it, especially during the pandemic. But there are all of these other issues that I will say that someone I recently heard say, it seems like the schools in the district, in the city, they seem to improve for a little while and then something happens. Well, I wonder why that is. The kids are not given the same resources that the kids in the suburbs are given. Oftentimes just by not being able to be in safe environments, and no one is helping them. And all we're doing is making sure that the cycle of poverty and the cycle of racism just continues. So I would say that it not only does the school board need to hold the superintendent and the district accountable, but the the school board needs to hold the county, the city, the state accountable for what these children need that they are not getting, that is not part of what the school day is expected to be in suburban districts who are better funded to begin with better school buildings, where if there is an issue and they want a new school building, they can they have the tax money to pay for that, or they can put a bond and vote on a bond, and we can't do those things here.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the accountability, holding the state and the county and the city accountable for resources that are supposed to be going to the school district that our students desperately need. You pointed out that there's this cycle of improvement and then things kind of splutter out. One of the things that I've noticed about the Syracuse City School District budgets is that they often depend on a lot of grants and temporary state funds and these competitions that the governor is so fond of having different impoverished regions of the state competing for funding. Hunger Games, anyone? So we get funding for a program and the program runs and then the funding runs out and we're done. So I think what's important is for us to break that cycle of temporary funding and being held hostage by the vagaries of whatever's happening in the budget cycle this year. I want to pause and take time to note that this is Fireside Chat Fridays with Parents for Public Schools, where we talk about the state of public education here in Syracuse. Our guests today are Karen Cordano, candidate for Syracuse City School Board, and Amalia Skandalis, a former art teacher in the city of Syracuse. Now, I want to pivot a little bit to discuss what we're calling the digital divide. I think everyone's familiar with this. We're especially familiar with it now that we've been a year into COVID and schools shut down abruptly and we all had to figure out how are we going to teach our kids. So one of the things that became very apparent very quickly is that there is an inequality and inequity in access to reliable internet, in access to equipment, computers, laptops, those kinds of things. And I discovered today, not just today, but fairly recently, that one of the issues with education here in Syracuse is that sometimes the staff don't have access to technology to be able to support students. I see Straight Indie Radio's raising their hand.
Hey, Sam, we have a question from Straight Independent Radio Online.
Okay.
This comes from Jordan in Syracuse. He'd like to know, can being an ally sometimes be detrimental to marginalized groups or perhaps hinder the advancement of individuals that may be more appropriate or suitable to be at the table?
Okay, who wants to take that question?
Well, I'm assuming that was targeted, that the question was for me. And I think that that's a really fair question. And I think it's a really hard question. I think that it would depend on the ally, and it would depend on how much grandstanding, how much listening, how much skin in the game the person would have. I send my kids to the district, and so I'm all in. I have a personal investment in making sure that my kids are educated, and so far I've been very happy with that. I also think that I have a lot to learn, but I am stepping up and saying that I am ready to do this. I have been working towards it for a number of years, through educating myself and volunteering for various committees, but I do want to listen. So yeah, I think that that could be an issue. And I also think that I am the right choice for school board.
Amalia, do you want to take a stab at that question?
I think that sometimes it's important to also know when to give that seat at the table. Because representation matters and diversity matters. And I think what we've had in institutions of education, systemic institutions that further racism and institutional oppression, it's very important to have all the areas of that. And I'm not saying that a white ally can't also be that. You know, I'm speaking not in frame of anybody else, but, you know, even more so myself, I've recognized tables that maybe I shouldn't myself be at because somebody else might be better suited to be a voice at that table. So I think that the most important thing about being an ally is being able to listen and actually serve the needs of the people that you're seeking to help, and making sure that their needs are kind of in front of your own, I guess, for lack of a different way of explaining it. It's hard to share that seat at the table. We need more seats at the table, but you know, diversity and representation matters. And I think that we need a lot more of that in different areas of all policy rooms.
I co-sign on the need for more seats at the table to provide a wider range of voices and a wider range of experience. And I note that Syracuse City School District is a majority minority district, meaning the majority of our students fall into the categories that are considered minorities here in the United States. And that seems to manifest itself in quite a few ways. We also have a large population that lives below the poverty line here in the city. And that gets me back to this issue of the digital divide. We saw the scramble to get technology into the hands of students. We saw that students would bring home a laptop from someplace or the other, but they wouldn't have access to Wi-Fi at home so that they could use the laptop to interact with whatever resources were being provided online by the school district. And my question is, how do we address here in Syracuse this issue with this digital divide, where there is this stark poverty line, it's ubiquitous, and people don't have what are considered regular everyday resources like internet in their homes?
Would you like me to jump on?
Karen, we'll start with you and then Amalia.
Okay.
So I think that in this latest, the stimulus package, where we received over a period of 2 years, more than $40 million, unfortunately, that money, the state is counting on that to plug holes in the budget for them. What that money is meant for is to only be used for things that are related to the pandemic. So there is a pot of money that exists that we need to be working with the city. I think so many of these issues, they're not just school district issues. Mm-hmm. These are issues that are citywide issues and countywide issues. You know, doing city hotspots and having the city help fund that, or the county help fund that, or making sure that stimulus money that is coming into the state is specifically for that. that's what we need to be advocating for. We are having this influx of money that is going to make the next year or two not as painful. And then when it ends, we're on a cliff, and that is when things get very, very serious in terms of money for our district. But right now we do have this opportunity to start plugging up those holes. At this point, the computers are purchased. We have a way to get them into the hands of the kids, but the Wi-Fi is the big issue. And I think that it's not just an issue for the kids, it's an issue. I know a teacher last spring where our PTO was trying to convince her to let us buy her a hotspot because she was driving to a fast food restaurant because she lived out in the sticks, and she was sitting in the parking lot all day teaching using the Wi-Fi that way. So yes, the internet is an issue for particularly for the children, but it's a larger issue as well.
Yeah, and there are issues that impact the school district that they didn't start in the school district, they just became apparent in the school district. There are issues with city governance, with county governance, with state governance.
It's like I-81 is this big issue. It's a school issue. Whether or not we're going to do the community grid or not, that's a school issue. You have a school that's a couple feet from 81. You have a structure that has split the city and ensured generational poverty continued for generations to come after it was built. All of these larger issues, yes, they are now, we are stuck with them, but the city and the county needs to take, the state needs to take responsibility as well. The federal government needs to take responsibility for what's going to happen at Dr. King when 81 is under construction in terms of the environmental impact.
That's a great point. Amalia, do you want to take a stab at the question?
Sure. Just so that I'm answering correctly here, we're discussing the question is around the digital divide, resource technology, and available budget in the age of COVID and virtual learning. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about it.
I would agree that we have very many different levels of problems. So many levels. We have what has been a historical problem in the Syracuse City School District with almost a $500 million a year school budget. We have a county problem that has now mandated either 5-day in-person or 5-day fully virtual. In my opinion, County Executive Ryan McMahon should now also be mandated to supply full access internet to families with children, because, you know, that's absolutely correct. We're now being denied our rights to an education in various levels of function and policy and action, but yet they don't want to do their part on their end. Either 5 days a week or 5 days at home. Well, okay, I could barely get the internet to work here all day when we needed to. My own kids were falling behind. You know, as an education professional that has 2 master's degree and has been in the game for 15 years, I've been asking for hard copy materials. What can I bring home? What can I supplement for my own kids? We act like we haven't been doing education the old way since 1876. And all of a sudden I can't pick up a packet for my kids and I can't pick up hard materials for my kids. I don't even want the computer, to be very frank with you, because I don't like how it's being handled. Education professionals are getting frankly lazy. They're frankly copying education materials from YouTube and calling that teaching. I can't even with physical education. So in New York State, a 6th grader, my daughter's in 6th grade, equivalencies of instruction for New York State for a 6th grader is 180 minutes. Equivalencies of instruction for an 8th grader in New York State is 90 minutes. I have one 6th grader, I have one 8th grader. So I looked up the very exact numbers because I want to be exactly sure. how much education my children should be getting. For physical education, one example, they watch a 3 to 5 minute video and answer a 10 to 15 question Google form, and that's called an equivalency of instruction now. Since when? What piece of New York State law passed that said that was now acceptable as education? I don't understand. When we talk about research, resources, and digital technology, SCSD has been fairly deficient for years, and I'm going to frame it back to East Syracuse Manoa. I'm familiar with the budget writing process of both, as both a parent, a teacher, and a school board member. Dr. Desiato in East Syracuse Manoa School District secured one-to-one technology for 100% of our students through 3 years worth of a SIG grant, School Improvement Grant, SIG. She was able to secure the money to purchase one-to-one Chromebooks for 100% of our population years ago. Our second wave of computers came through right before COVID hit, so we were in a little bit better position to satisfy our students. I think that SCSD has the opportunity to reappropriate some funds. I think if we start connecting some other conversations, like removing SROs from schools, like defunding the police and communities, when we talk about not closing them and canceling these things and, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're talking about seriously moving money away from over-militarized, overfunded departments that should be moved to help our children at a basic level. If you want a community that functions healthy with sustained human beings that aren't traumatized and aren't, you know, gonna survive by any means possible, you're creating an environment where people don't have a choice. What choice do we expect to have these children make? They're not having field experiences. They're not having field trips. They're not having one-to-one internships and partner relationships. Another thing I would compare in ESM that we do really well is our CTE programs, our career and technical education programs. In ESM, we very much involve stakeholders at every level. We have student groups that inform, not just to placate individuals and not just to put it on paper and not just to say we did these things, but to actually care about what people are saying and apply their words to process and action. I would say that that's one thing that SCSD is not great at doing, as somebody who's been involved in the district for over a decade, as a teacher, as a parent, as a professional, as an artist. We need to do more than just survey people, write it down, and then ignore them. When we look at a school like Blodgett, for example, that's had the auditorium chained for over 25 years, and students there couldn't commence to their high school year without walking across the street into a trailer. But yet we're impressing upon these thousands of children that their lives matter and their futures matter, and really we want you to be here. But we're not providing busing and transportation to 100% of students. We're claiming that that will cost $2 million more out of a $500 million budget. First of all, I think you could find it. Second of all, those buses drive by those babies anyway. They are driving by the babies anyways. Why can't they pick them up without that costing more dollars? That doesn't even make sense. That doesn't make sense in the maths. And I'm an art teacher. I don't do the math. That doesn't make sense. Those numbers, that can't make sense to me. I have seen children, special needs students that I've had personally at Porter, walking across the street under that little bridge, trying to get up past Rosie's there, trying to get up to Porter and walk across that way in traffic.
That's
in
a crazy
rain,
intersection.
in snow. It is so dangerous. I've seen cars beep and skid and almost hit our families. That is so grossly negligent with the almost $500 million they have and have had that I can't point fingers at other people. I mean, it's all their fault. It's all the levels and it's all their problems and it's all their fault, and they all got names, and I don't even know because we've gotten so far away at this point from where we were already deficient in resources, technology, transportation, health and safety in our buildings, COVID. How about health and safety and infestations? And I sure hope they took time while these buildings were closed to mitigate the straight infestations in some of these buildings. Because I know kids can't learn when they see cockroaches running up the wall, and kids can't learn when there's bed bugs present on their clothing or personal items. And teachers can't teach when they're told by their administration that they need to catch the bug on a piece of tape to prove that it's in their room to begin with. As an education professional, there's so many levels.
I think that takes us back to the work environment and the learning environment that we have here in the district, it's making things more challenging for families. It's making things more challenging for students. It's making things more challenging for staff. And Karen, I want to circle back to you as we wind down and ask about, how does the school board address these things? How does it change the culture in the district? How do we change the culture with respect to education in the city and in the county and the state? It's a tall order, but the children are worth that kind of work. So how do we change change the district and the attitudes that people have about education and the students, and how we should be treating our teachers?
So there, I'm trying to find, I had come across these webinars, Equity Talks. It's an organization. I don't have, I can find out the information and get it to you, but I have attended a couple of them, and it's really interesting on a number of levels. It's superintendents from usually urban districts around the country talking, and to hear the same problems, it's incredibly frustrating and also moderately comforting to hear that we're experiencing the same things. But I think it was the superintendent in Indianapolis who said what the pandemic has taught us is we can pivot. The thought beforehand, like everyone is like, oh, well, districts are just too big to make these changes quickly. Well, the pandemic taught us that's not true. We had to make changes really fast. So I think that the answer is we just do it. We say it must be done, and we do the work. I mean, I feel personally really ready to dive into this work. And there's nothing that should stand in the way of stop that. We just do it. We do it by the board saying that this is what the focus needs to be. This is what we have to do.
Amalia?
Can you reframe the question for me, Sam?
Sure. Well, it was more along the lines of, what can the school board do to change the culture of the district and change the attitudes that people have about education?
I think that
We've only got a couple minutes left, though.
Oh Lord, I don't have time to think. She just wants me to talk. Nobody ever wants me to just talk, Sam. You want me to think first. Gosh. I think one thing that would really help the school board address those needs more directly is if they divvied up the schools a little bit and maybe had each board member be in charge of a specific set of schools, and then to really get boots on the ground in those schools and with those families, really building those relationships is the biggest word I think that our district needs to focus on at different levels. I think that having those hard, honest conversations about the reality of what's going on and the reality of what our kids need is important. Nobody's got time to point fingers and make blame. Like, it is what it is. Here's what's happening and how you gonna fix it. I think that's the most important thing going forward. But really being more in touch of what's going on in the classroom, not just what's on paper. I know personally as the board member, it's very easy to just get that paper, skim it over. You have your time to read it before your meeting. You're voting yay or nay. You may or may not understand all the lines on the budget. I know when I was digesting the Syracuse City School budget, for example, at $486 million, there were several lines that were called miscellaneous or other, to the tune of $100,000 here, $100,000 there. I didn't understand what that was as a parent or a teacher. I think that school board members understanding what all of those line items mean, and it's okay to take the time. Don't let them make you feel like you have to rush and just vote yay or nay. It's okay to ask for clarifying questions. I think it's important to not just go through the motions, but to really become more active in doing the work. I think doing the work is the most important part of it. And I think it's easier to talk about the work than to do the work. And so I think that, 2021 needs less talking and more action would be my biggest thing.
Okay, thank you both for being on the show on Fireside Chat Fridays. We are out of time. So Karen Cordano, school board candidate, Amalia Skandalis, former Syracuse City School District teacher, thank you both for your time and for sharing your thoughts here on Fireside Chat Fridays. We're sponsored by Parents for Public Schools of Syracuse, where we work to give voice to the people, the families, the community here in Syracuse on matters of public education. I am your host, the Idea Dynamo, Samantha Pierce. Thank you and good night.